Welcome everybody to Chatterbox, a web series focused on the latest in insurtech trends. We've entitled this episode, Dispelling the Myths of Legacy. Is it right to be labelled old? My guest for this debate should provide us with lots of forthright views today. We have CEO of the world's oldest insurtech, Kirstin Duffield. And as ever, I'm joined on Chatterbox by my right-hand man, Genesis Technologies, Symes. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So let's delve right into things. Kirstin, what does legacy mean to you?
Legacy. Well, I think the first thing is that it sort of fills me with grief, I think, over the market, that it's become a connotation of a bad word. But I suppose what people understand it to be is that it's old. Legacy is always the system that you're trying to replace. It's always the system that somebody has forgotten in the back of the corner. But it's also perhaps lost its shine, and maybe it never even had a shine, to say that it's the experience, the knowledge, the depth of that programming. It's everything that's made it be able to be put into the corner and keep on being reliable every morning, and it keep on doing exactly what it was told to do at the time. I think the difficulty we now have is, as title of this show, is to dispel the myths about it.
And Andre, what does legacy mean to you?
I see it in a slightly different way, but I do agree with Kirstin in the sense that there's a lot of experience that comes with legacy. But when legacy is used as a negative term, I potentially think it's more about legacy thinking rather than legacy technology. And while there is quite a lot of merit in having good tech that's working, and just before we started, I mentioned that cars today are still using round wheels as they did 100 years ago. It doesn't mean that the round wheel is a bad piece of technology today, but we have to continually reinvent how these round wheels work, the rubber that hits the road, the kind of suspension around it, etc. So the challenge I find when it comes to legacy is that a lot of people are scared to explore new things away from the existing legacy tech stack, purely because they are worried about their careers.
Yep, I mean, they often say no one got fired for buying IBM.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard that phrase so many times in the insurance industry. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So why does no one get fired for buying IBM? I mean, where does legacy have the edge over these kind of newer software platforms that are coming out? Kirstin, do you want to tackle that one first?
Well, I think as I previously alluded to, it's the experience. Particularly, I mean, our market is the London market, so it has its nuances, it has its peculiarities. It has almost its own language. Subscription markets, LPANs, slips, all sorts of things nobody else has ever heard of. And I think the balance there is that legacy understands that one risk is going to be completely different from another one. It's not something that the end user now is really in a position to codify. If they're having to use a single system to put data onto DDM, the platform for delegated authority, if you're having to also put the financial entries into exchanging on an LPAN or via an EBOT, all of these things, you act as a sort of hub in the middle of a wheel of lots of other technologies. So at the core, you really, really need to have a solid base, even if originally it might have been written 32 years ago. But then to be able to do that, you have to continually innovate. So it's extremely difficult that if someone's using the term legacy and they then say, well, you were formed 32 years ago, the system is, been in the offing, been used for many years, that must mean that you're a legacy system. New and bright and shiny is not always good. Actually, in this market, you need solid, reliable mathematics at the core. You need to be able to do currency exchange. You need to be able to move through time, FCA compliant, all these moving factors, and keep pace with these organizations changing edicts every 6 months, every year. New technologies coming on board, you need to be able to communicate with them. I think that's really key to sort of differentiate that legacy is not really a bad word. It shouldn't create a pariah in the technological society.
I think you raise a really interesting point there as well, because there's lots of different platforms and technologies you can use. And I think you were talking there about, foundations really. And the fact that I think of it like a game of Jenga. If I'm going to build my foundations or build my house, I want the foundations to be really, really secure. That's not the thing that I want to mess around with, because everything else is going to be built on top of that. So I suppose with core systems in particular, those kind of tried, tested, experienced platforms are perhaps more important than ever. because it's all the stuff that's going to hang off them and all the stuff that's going to rely on them that maybe you can't afford to take a risk. But Andre, what do you think about legacy technology, or I don't even like using that term. It feels like the wrong, but older technology, and where do you think it has the edge?
Look, I think it has the edge purely because, as Kirstin alluded to, there's experience around it, and that people have been using it for a while. It's tried, it's tested, it's proven. And I'm glad you bring up the Jenga analogy, because we use that quite often too. And the challenge is that you're right, your foundation needs to be strong for you to be able to build something on top of that. But if your foundation is a bunch of legacy block or Jenga blocks, you've got a real problem, because then the whole house of cards is going to come tumbling down. Now, I saw a stat the other day that showed that I think about 20% of the globe's insurance platforms still runs on COBOL back in some way. There's obviously middleware layers over and above that, but it's still there, and it's still running a large portion of the industry. I think the challenge that comes in is that if we don't start refactoring the actual core itself at some point in time, we're going to have to demolish the house and rebuild the foundation. There has to be a transition from legacy to newer technology somehow. And whilst legacy does have its place to keep everything stable and keep going, and it does what it's supposed to do, we have to transition, because sooner or later there aren't going to be any more COBOL developers left in the world, and then what?
I think you're absolutely right, Andre. We've really got a challenge, and we've met it several times. We've changed our interface layer from Forms 2.3 to Forms 6 in Oracle, and then into .NET, and now into React. And that technical debt is no mean feat. I have to really underline, if anyone felt like getting into this market, they do need their heads tested sometimes. It's an extraordinary big uphill challenge to keep refactoring, and that's what sets what we've been called a legacy or an oldest insurtech. But that's what resets the balance and sets us apart, is the fact that you continually innovate and continually refactor. Smaller steps are far more manageable than great giant steps.
Absolutely. I want to just also reiterate that I have being 20 years old ourselves as a company, I do have a lot of respect for people that can refactor their code, that can continuously innovate. I mean, we see it in the music industry a lot, people coming out with one-hit wonders, and this is effectively what's happening a lot in the insurtech. Yes. Great ideas popping up, but how many successful bands have launched 10 albums that were all a success? Only the real greats are like that. And so whilst there's a place for all the new pop artists popping up all over the place and the mumble rap, I do still think that if we look at the proper real artists of the past, they've had multiple successes. So a company that can reinvent itself, that can reinvest in its own technology and stay up to date, they probably were a better long-term partner than just trying to snap up insurtechs here and there.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
I love that analogy, that it's one-hit wonders versus long-term rock stars. I feel like maybe we should drop the ACY off the end of legacy and turn it into legends. The legends of the industry, rather than
liking your thought. I coin that now.
No, I think that's a really good idea. But undoubtedly, we've talked about some of the strengths, but undoubtedly, legacy systems do come with their challenges. And Kirstin, what do you think those challenges are? Because I think it's important that we address the positives and the negatives so that people know what they're getting and what the full picture looks like.
Absolutely. And I think with, if you say stereotypical legacy systems, I think the challenge is frequency of releases. I think that's one thing, even if somebody does come up with some requirements, they not only require perhaps a diminishing pool of people to be able to say as a BA, yes, that's possible, and this is how we would design it to be able to work with the system. But then the testing overhead is huge to be able to go through all of the rounds that you need to go through. I think for us, we cracked that early doors. We definitely came out of the stalls with an agnostic system, a system that had a very, very good central design, and we've been very fortunate that that's proven its worth. So we release 4 times a year, which I think even in this market is pretty unheard of. But I think the biggest for all of us, every system that's probably been in at least its second incarnation, it's that technical debt, because nobody pays for it. A client will want it to carry on, and they want all the new, whistles and bangs. They want the pop-up calendars. They want, sort of the API to just be free of charge. They just expect it. So nobody is going to pay for that refactoring that is required to enable all of that assumed technology that they get because of Apple or because of Samsung or their latest download, and now culture has all become synonymous, and expected. Their level of expectation is phenomenal, and not prepared to pay for it, which, you know, you can understand it. We don't in our personal lives with our phones, so why should we in the business world?
I've used that analogy a few times recently when talking about ecosystems, and one of the terms I always talked about was monolithic. And I find it really interesting that I speak to a lot of people in the MGA and the broker space in particular, and they talk about when you're trying to find them a platform, they want something that does everything. So they want something quite monolithic. They want something that literally they log into it every morning and it fulfills every need they could possibly have. But Andre, we chatted about this the other day, and it's quite hard to have that, right? Because if everything's in one spot and everything's one system, managing that code base is really difficult, right?
Yeah, it becomes quite difficult, and not just that, it becomes quite expensive. So if you take, you know, Kirstin's industry as an example, being the Lloyd's market, there's many decades and generations of nuance in there. Now, how do you provide all of these nuances in all the different iterations with all the different integrations that you need in a no-code GUI type interface to the newer, younger crowd, and only charge them 500 quid a month for it? It really does become challenging, you know. And you know, if you want to then make any sort of change below that, you know, going back to your foundation analogy, is that do some work on your house. The moment that you have to change the foundation, it becomes quite expensive. So you need to kind of leave it if you can, and then build the technology over and above that, and that can become more cost effective. You know, so you can build out these ecosystems where if you can plug certain things in and certain things out, it becomes a bit more cost effective. But just purely from a perception thing, you know, if you also look, and Kirstin, I don't know if you've done this before, but we've done quite a large assessment of our platform utilization. And because we are from front end all the way through to claims and reinsurance, etc., we've got quite a broad platform. The actual utilization per client is actually very low touch. Well, it's actually very little. They only use certain portions of the system. No one uses everything. So this demand that I want everything, it doesn't actually really correlate back to business requirements.
I think there's you can probably see that in any company that has a ticketing process for clients to sort of suggest new ideas and have a conscious, we don't, I hasten to add, but a conscious policy of leaving them for 2 months and seeing if they still require it at the end of the 2 months. You know, it's like sort of these requirements tend to disappear. But I think if you understand your client base and exactly that, look at the utilization in reality, you can see where to focus your concentration. So we saw in ours that there was an incredibly high utilization of the query screens and reportage. So the first thing we converted out of the previous incarnation, the form 6, was we converted all the query screens because we knew they were going to be the heaviest utilized, and we wanted people to be able to click and drag to group, to download, to, you know, export, to be able to filter, and they wanted to be able to do this intuitively. They wanted to be able to do it in the same way they might experience Excel or any other you know, tool sets that they've got in front of them. So we focused our first you know, sort of development resource on all the query suites first, and that meant that all the people who don't really use the system very heavily, maybe not the, you know, very heavy technician roles, the brokers who perhaps use the system slightly more light touch, they would get the experience they're expecting first. And I think it's understanding where to focus your resources is a key element there.
Absolutely. I want to rewind slightly, Andre, because I didn't give you your chance. I rabbited on as usual and didn't give you your chance to answer, you know, what challenges you think legacy can cause within businesses. And I know you've got some interesting views on this.
I think the biggest challenge there is that with the kind of power that the legacy platform has when it comes to decision making at a strategic level is probably the most damaging or the most dangerous, is that we can't go into these markets because our legacy platform can't facilitate this, or we can't do this new things because changing our legacy platform is going to take 18 months and a couple of £1 million. That's where I believe that the biggest challenge is. And then as you kind of kick this can down the road going, well, maybe next year we'll re-platform, maybe next year we'll put out legacy and replace it. The next thing you know, you've kind of been on platform for 25 years and it's green screen, and it might be running fine, but the market is changing around you. So we do know that people are going to have to change their platforms, the way that they do insurance. Obviously, in the Lloyd space, it's a little bit different than the PNC space at the moment, where there's quite a bit more innovation, entrance from outside the market, insurtechs turning public. So there's a lot more noise and a lot more challenge around that area of keeping legacy up to date. Because if the people around you are adapting and changing to the new requirements and the new risks that are emerging in this new world we live in, and you can't adapt to that, well, you're kind of not going to survive, as Darwin would say.
So, Kirstin, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the London market in particular, in terms of the software offerings that are out there. We talk about legacy and like we say, it's been demonized somewhat, but actually there aren't many new, what we would call new vendors out there, are there? There's very few. So why do you think that is, that there's so few new entrants into that space?
Well, I mean, I was reading an article the other day which talked about sort of 5 or 10 things that you should never say to an investor, and one of them was that we have no competitors. But it is a bizarre little bubble that we've been in. Last new entrant was 2003, really, in what we would call the broking market, and that broking market has traditionally seen and now has about 7 players in it. And they really deliver systems, minus a few proprietary systems. They deliver systems to 250 brokers. But equally, why would somebody come into the market when they're going to have to fight over only 250 companies as a possible market? That's going from one man and his dog up to Aon. You're going to have to pitch somewhere in that range. You can't tackle from one end to the other. So you've already narrowed your market again. So it's not a very appealing landscape to come into. And it's also got a lot of complexities, a lot of nuances. The very purpose of a broker being put on, or Lloyd's broker being put on this planet, is to sell a different risk today from what they sold yesterday. So computers aren't terribly brilliant at that. I mean, never mind machine learning and AI, but actually somebody has to code them to expect a certain level of differences. And the whole point of the London market is to be unique, is to be, the insurer of last resort. One man's shuttle is not the next man's spaceship, and they're all going to be very unique. So I think it is a challenge to welcome new entrants. I think, going back to the points Andre raised earlier about having the foundations, I think now it's settled into sort of 7 or 8 vendors in this market. Some can deliver systems simultaneously to the MGAs and cover holders as well. Some of them will have branched out to being able to offer a different platform to insurers, but largely they are the same players. I think now it's about that foundation and being able to refactor to allow you to plug in all of the one-hit wonders that come up, the new sort of platforms to do this, the API to do that. We've just recently rolled out the ability to put on your schedule of IMO numbers for your ships, press a button and off it goes and retrieves all the necessary data about those ships from marine traffic. It's those kinds of aspects that makes the user experience quicker, faster, augment their data, and sets them above their competition. And I think that's where it is. It's about sitting down in the foundation and then being able to connect to other systems and create that ecosystem.
I think the thing people underestimate as well, and this goes back to what you alluded to there in terms of there's only kind of 250 people to compete for, is the vast amount of money that it takes to build a complex system and time. And I think we see that with a lot of the newer vendors, and Andre, I'm sure you see this more probably in your space, but there's a lot of people who think, oh, it's really easy to go out and build a platform. They kind of simplify it. It's going to be really easy, and all we need it to do is this, this, and this. And then the more and more you delve into it, you realize how deep it is, how much time that needs, how much money that requires, how much capital and investment. And I guess maybe that's why it comes in. But I see a lot of platforms that start out with the best of intentions, have invested a lot of money, and have ended up with something still relatively shallow at the end of it. And I think it shocked me when we spoke, Andre, and we talked about Genesis, and you talked about kind of the investment that had been made into Genesis in terms of the technology. And I was amazed at how much it was. I mean, now you're not one of those with a shallow system. Yours is incredibly complex, but that costs a lot of money. Do you kind of see the same thing? Do you think have you experienced the same?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people see, and this is where I often get quite testy with all of the attention that insurtech attracts, is because it seems to be this really cool place to go and start a business, because you're going to be raising multi-millions of pounds in different kinds of fundings. And you are going to sell your company in 5 years' time for 100 million pounds to someone like a WeFox or a Commerzbank or someone like that. And everybody wants to pop in and go, let me build this quote and bind system. And then they start from the front end and they start trying to build a policy admin system towards the back. And once you get to the back end, you start going, okay, what have I gotten myself into? Because that is where the real challenge sits. And I think that's where Genesis is a little bit different. So we started as a back end system building out to the front end. But the problem is that now we are flooded with all new neo-passives, which is exciting because it keeps the incumbents and the traditional players on their toes. I mean, competition is good. But the challenge that it has brought, I suppose you can almost liken it to the aggregation play when it comes to motor insurance, that it's become a price play. So now everybody goes, right, I want to quote and bind platform because I'm NGA X and I'm going to start selling product Y. All I need is to be able to do quote and bind. So let me go and buy some sort of digital direct-to-consumer journey. Great, and it costs you next to nothing to buy this thing. Okay, now I've all of a sudden got 1,000 policies. What do I do with these? How do I administer this? How do we actually start doing MTAs? Oops, well, I want to do a claim. How do I facilitate FNOL? How do I do claims processing? How do I get this back to via bordereaux? Insurance is extremely complex, and the tech with the skateboards, like what we are, you don't see the complexity unless you've been in insurance for 20 years. So it takes a large amount of time to build out a complex system. There's absolutely a space for disruption for the newer pass players to come in and keep people like ourselves on our toes. But don't think that you are going to get some Series A funding and build a policy admin system that's going to compete with the existing players off the bat.
No. I mean, one of the things I keep reminding, our team and players in the market is that insurance is, all we do is move money. I mean, we don't manufacture anything. We don't have logistics of to handle with vessels and ships. We don't have any of those complexities. But on that balance, we've made just moving money about as complex as it possibly could be. But everyone focuses on buying something that, even in the London market, it's about constructing a contract and then trying to read the data out of the contract. And there's a huge amount of effort going into that. Well, surely you put the data into a system first and then construct the contract. It's the wrong way around. Exactly the same as if you know how your bordereau has got to be put together, you know how the structure of your policy needs to be in the first place. And there is a very distinct lack of understanding that you really code systems from the back forwards, not from the forwards backwards.
You've both kind of alluded to this, and you'll have seen me talk about this quite a lot recently online, largely because it suits my business model. Let's not lie. But I often find that technology is really, really complex. Insurance is really, really complex, and the people and the decisions being made around buying, and I'm talking away from the really, really big players who have whole procurement teams and the like. But if you go down to regional broker level, for example, or small syndicate or small MGA or similar, actually there isn't necessarily the expertise to know what good looks like. And I think for you in particular, Andre, you kind of alluded to this there, that it's becoming something of a price play. And when you're charging, let's say, £5,000 a month for a system, and someone comes in and says, I'm £500 a month, and you just pay that every month and you get all of the same stuff, but you clearly don't. And they're not necessarily qualified as at the broker level to make that decision and make that judgment. So I guess that makes it really, really difficult as well for people like yourselves, right, Andre?
Yeah. Look, it doesn't make it too difficult. It just makes it easier to actually pick your partners. Now, there's two schools of thought on this in our world, at least, and that is that if you're a regional broker, and I said this to the South African broker community the other day, is that if you're a regional broker and you've got a couple of million on book, and you are a steady state and you are running your business and you're making money and you are happy, and this is going to be your retirement fund in 10 years' time, don't for your platform. Go find something that's most cost effective that can do what you're doing today. If you want to grow and you are looking at expanding into new markets, etc., and that means that there's going to be new complexities, new technical requirements that are going to come out, then it might make a little bit more sense to invest now in the tech stack that can facilitate your future growth, so you don't have to continually repurchase. So it's a bit of a shooting ourselves in the foot thing, but we are quite staunch on don't just use good tech for the sake of using good tech. You actually need to solve a business problem. with that. And if Genesis is too complex for your company, well, then it just is.
True. And how price sensitive is your market, Kirstin, in terms of, how much of it's driven by, actually which is the cheapest and which one is the best, or the best for me, I should always say.
Yes, I think it's a very strange world because, as I said before, 250 brokers. Okay, we also appeal to MGAs and cover holders as well. But if you've only got that market, then you're really only going to be the right price for a subset of that market. So, there may be a ceiling to the size of clients that we would appeal to. I think frustratingly, we're a 2 million turnover company, and that will count us out of some companies purely because some FD is sitting there with a risk assessment and says, nope, sorry, looked at the balance sheet and you're off the book. So it's very frustrating, particularly when it might be a smaller group within their larger group that is looking for the system. So that small group is a team of 25 people. The group itself may have 25,000 people, and suddenly you're judged as a core supplier on the 25,000 people rather than the 20 or 25, and that can be a bit of a struggle. And so it really is down to the within your very small subset. I don't think we very often come up against an exact competitor in the last round of an RFP where we're now down to price, because if we are up against one of our other competitors in the market who tends to appeal at the larger end, then somebody didn't do their due diligence properly. We do tend to find that once we have got past the first level of inquiry, most of our sales, we're the only runner. It's a question of the fact that it's ours to lose rather than ours to win.
That's a nice position to be in.
It's a nice position. Well, you might be counted out before you even get there. You have to remember that. But it does mean that you tend not to have to do a lot of investment into endless RFPs. You should be able to get past the first stage at a relatively cost effective. And if you're the right team, and I think that's something we haven't particularly addressed here. We were talking about the resources for the actual technology, but you've also got to supply, certainly in the London market, a really well-educated team. Our clients don't often know the answers to some of these quandaries and some of these issues. So we pull our staff from ex-brokers, ex-technicians. Every member of the staff has to go through the CII courses, no matter what, whether they're in the admin department or whether they're a developer. If somebody rings up on the phone and says, I want to put an overriding commission on my proportional treaty, I don't want somebody to turn around and go, you what? And, it's... Exactly. So we've got to have that relationship with our clients, that very collaborative relationship with our clients. And one of the ways we have managed to do that is a single source code, all clients on the same version. We don't do donor systems, which means that they come together as a community, which I think has been part of the reason why we've survived so long.
Perfect. And the question I wanted to end on today, which is, why do you think legacy has grown to be such a negative word in terms of the industry? What do you think? What's the history that's caused that? I'll kind of go with you on that one first, Andre.
I suppose it's kind of the opposite of why things get hyped too. You kind of have to create a problem to try and fix it. But having said that, there are challenges around legacy. We have to speak, and I'm just going to caveat that in this particular conversation by saying that I'm talking particularly about the P&C space, because there is a lot more requirement regarding innovation, change, etc. there than there potentially is at the moment in Kirstin's space. So, and there is legacy challenge there. We do have the no one gets fired for buying IBM issue, and also there's a risk. If you are a large insurance company running a couple of £1 billion, ripping out a core system and replacing it is a substantial undertaking. And as we've previously likened it to changing the engines of a Boeing mid-flight. It really is dangerous. But if you want to get better, you have to have some sort of innovation platform. And I think this is potentially why we aren't going to pivot from legacy systems straight into ecosystems of insurtechs. But there's probably going to be a hybrid of the two that's going to get us over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think I think the point there is in why it's being demonized, and why is old and you know, retirement and all these words, why are they in our culture demonized? It's exactly the same. We're all human. COVID has really sort of put us through our test to recognize some of that sometimes. And you know, the loudest voices, we can all work from home, I'm all right, Jack, you know, but actually we're bigger than that. We're part of a society, and we're made up of human beings. And I think we do consider old as a negative word. In other cultures, you know, old is distinctly that of authority, is that of wisdom, it's that of experience, of being able to teach the young. And I think certainly in the Western world, we don't have that in our culture. We certainly have a belief of omnipotence amongst the youth. And you know, entitlement is something that is just naturally bestowed and not earned. And I'm not suggesting that we need one or the other, but I think a hybrid of the two, learning from experience, passing down that knowledge, saying that, you know, these kinds of policies that are spread across multiple binders are not uncommon. We do see them. Look at the proof. We see them. You know, when somebody says, oh, we don't have to code that because it doesn't happen very often. Well, it's not the 80-20 rule. You have to code for every scenario in this world, and that is really important. So I think culturally we are to blame for giving that term its negative connotations.
Well, I'm afraid that is all we have time for on this episode, but please let us know your thoughts on legacy technology. Do you agree with Kirstin? Do you agree with Andre? Do you have a completely different view altogether? Also, what topics would you like to see discussed in future editions of Chatterbox, or who do you think would make a great guest with some strong opinions? But for now, the chatter concludes, but please join us next time for more InsurTech with the gloves off.